Oh, are you enjoying these tokens as much as I am? Because you can get them for only $5 on the Man Sant Patreon. That is now fully revamped, folks. We've got new rewards, tiers that I can fully commit to even with the busy schedule. So at $5, you get a Cold Foil Might and Cold Foil Agility as part of the yearly token drop. And these ones, yes, folks, are cold foil. Don't ask me how I got it done. At $10, you'll also get one VOD review per month, and at $50, you'll get an hour and a half of coaching with yours truly. Results not guaranteed. If that sounds enticing, I do truly appreciate all the support from you out there. But with that, you're here for the Levia deck tech, so let's get back to the video. Let's go, my Levia fans, because we are back with a part the Mistveil deck tech for Levia Shadowborn Abomination. Now, this is a deck that I really have been putting I always do, let's face it, a lot of effort into with testing and trying to refine it, not because I'm actually playing it all in this season, but because I have a duty to my teammates on Fabled Runaways to point them in the right direction on whether they're even considering playing Levia or when they're testing into Levia in preparation for other people who might be considering it. So we're about 100 games in or so with part the Mistveil Levia builds, and I finally found one that is a bit more fine-tuned than just a day zero build like the heavy hitters one was that I put out, so I'm pretty excited to talk through it. This is a Mandible Claw Levia list. We can still run Mandible Claws. KO has not LL'd, and by golly, we really want to, because Mandible Claws are just a fantastic way to, of course, extend turns with Blood Rush Bellow, which Levia could so consistently pull off 3 wides, no problem. She could push for 4 wides, even easier when she was consumed, but now we have extra go again in the deck with Shadowrealm Horror, which makes 4 wides even that much more possible. So the 4 wide threat of Blood Rush is just so overwhelming, and you can't really get that out of any other build. Hexagore is actually pretty playable, but it doesn't have those damage ceilings that Blood Rush can enable. And so that's really why we're taking the claws. They are just oh so good, and they look really pretty. And then, of course, we are running the Demi Hero, and this is actually a really interesting metagame so far because 2 new heroes were added that prefer the redeemed game plan rather than the consumed game plan, because generally Plasmavet Levia Consumed is going to get played into aggressive matchups where you're all about trading damage per card, right? It's just a race to the finish line, and if you can flip into Consumed, only taking like 1 or 2 points of blood debt and then unlocking this entire Banish Zone worth of cards, that is just wildly strong for games that are maybe 6 turns or so. If those last 2 turns of the game are you as Plasmavet Levia Consumed, you're just wildly oppressive. And so Zen, right, is a matchup that's going to play that way. It's more aggressive, but Nu and Enigma stall out the game, and then you reach that tipping point where you could flip into Consumed, but your blood debt's probably getting high, 8+ or so, to where you risk milling yourself out. And at that point, you start to look at just playing a very careful first cycle into Redeemed at some point just to get value out of the life gain. You can reset your life back to 8, so you can go a little bit lower, try to play out of some endgame states where you always have to block around an attack react or something. Well, if you can just flip to 8 life, then you just don't have to do that. So Redeemed is more playable than ever, but of course we are adaptable. We are Levia players. We play on the fly, and so any matchup can really go either way. It just kind of depends how the cookie crumbles. Then into the equipment, you'll notice something different here, and that is this is my core 4 equipment, and there is no scabskin leathers. And actually, there's no scabskin leathers at all in this deck. I was trying scabskins and gamblers as a sideboard pretty consistently into illusionists and maybe even like grindier decks like Teklovossen, but what I was finding is that because you're building the deck to lean heavier into 1 cost so that there's all these synergy points around Shadowrealm Horror, the consistency of pushing a 2-cost into 1-cost play off of Hooves as kind of the floor of this card is just wildly consistent. Not to mention how you can construct wider plays off the back of Blood Rush, Art of War, anything that's kind of multiplying your turns. Hooves just adds that extra layer of forced damage on that turn cycle, which is just absolutely incredible. And it's graveyard fill, which if you're playing Levia with Scabskins, if that's what you're used to, you just never think about your Scabskins ending up in the graveyard to kind of help around some of these graveyard states. But now you can crack hooves, and when you get used to playing hooves in every game, it's something you look for. It's like, I'm trying to get this in graveyard. This is where I can like pivot into more aggressive plays, but if my opponent's now blocking out, I need my graveyard in a better spot. And so cracking hooves along with like, you know, the blocking with like the temper of Apex, the blade break of Scowling Fleshbag can all end up in pretty interesting graveyard states where you have a lot of control around your armor. So yeah, I'm really liking this equipment right now. Scowling Fleshbag, still just really good. It's great into new, it's great into Zen, so it's still a standout. Carrion Husk, the block value on this thing, every deck, even Enigma, is still running CNC, and you just get to ignore that with Carrion Husk, and also lets you play into protecting your flip that much more. We already talked about Hooves, and then of course Apex Bonebreaker. This is really the combo that makes Hooves of the Shadow Beast feel like you can get away with it, rather than even in past metas I was trying Hooves and Grasp as my main equipment duo, but Apex Bonebreaker is just so much value in the arm slot. You can get away with losing the 2-block on Scabs, because in a way getting that graveyard fill off Hooves is a point in its own right. So very, very similar equipment suite, and you just never have to worry about losing to ones. So I'm quite enjoying that. To round out everything we're taking, and that is a Cloak of Darkness, a Grasp of Darkness, and these are into Kano specifically. There is some experimenting to do with Grasp of Darkness over Apex Bonebreaker into Prism. It's something that Jason Chung was talking about when he was reviewing a Levia deck on the LSS channel, that Grasp of Darkness can help into the Prism matchup. I do need to explore that more myself. Then you've got Spoiled Skull also for Kano, and Vincent, and Viserai, and Enigma, and Teklo-Vossen. Really, apart from the Arcane Barrier, the toolbox effect and kind of the card advantage effect that Spoiled Skull brings to the table is nothing to scoff at, especially since now when you choose 3 targets, you can choose Dread Screamer, Shadowrealm Horror, and Blood Rush, and you don't need to add in these tech cards like Pulping or Wild Ride to make sure that you're choosing 3 Go Again enablers. And then lastly, Savage Sash. This is something we're taking into, right now I'm taking it into Enigma, I'm taking it into Teklo-Vossen. These decks that are just trying to build a wall, right, in some capacity, Savage Sash lets you, well, go over that wall, construct your own monstrous turn. The real exploration with Savage Sash that I need to pull off still is running it into more aggressive matchups and seeing if kind of cheating out a resource card out of Savage Sash is worth losing the block on Carrion Husk. But what I really value about Carrion Husk is that you can protect your flip better into aggro, and you just can't do that as well with Savage Sash. It's only going to block the 2. And then lastly, you need your tokens, and you're going to notice something here. Well, you're going to notice 2 things. First, look at these beautiful cold foil Might and Agility. If you've ever wanted to max rarity your Levia deck, you need these suckers, so be sure to join the Patreon for those. But you'll notice we don't have a Quicken token, and that's because this build has entirely cut Swing Big, and we're going to get to that as we look through the reds in just a second. So this guy right here is the main reason that a lot of the reds have shifted around. Actually, when the red shifting around has made a lot of the deck change, to be fair, but Shadowrealm Horror in this beautiful foil Japanese, this card has just such a ceiling that you want to play towards in Levia these days, that anything that's sacrificing the 1-cost pairing, since this is 2, similar to Dread Screamer, you're going to pitch a blue with that 1 left over. You're either playing out a free 1-cost with its effect, or you're already holding a 1-cost to basically make this an above rate Dread Screamer play. One of the really interesting things you can do with this card, play in a way where you're actually ready for any of these modes, where your arsenal's open, you pitch a blue, lead with Shadowrealm with a 1-cost in hand. If you only hit 1/6 on the banish, you can actually still trigger Hooves if you really need to push that 1-cost and just force the fact that this was going to be a 3-card 13 value play. So Hooves can do that for you with only 1 banish of the 6, or you can just let it be a 2-card 7 and then arsenal the 1-cost, that's fine. If you hit 2 6s on it, then you come in for your 3-card 13. If you hit 3 6s on it, Well, one of the 6s you banish is probably a 1 cost, so we're kind of heavy with those in this deck. And then you come in for 2 card 13 and arsenal that 1 cost. So you're actually protected against any of the outcomes with how we're trying to build and play this Shadowrealm Horror Levia deck. This card is just really, really fantastic. It's a better Dread Screamer in most situations, but you will see some moments where there are these misses in graveyard that you couldn't control because maybe you just saw too many power cards early, you saw your Blood Rushes, you saw your Art of Wars. Those are misses you can't really help but play out in your graveyard, and you will wish that this always got go again. But for the majority of the time, it is just a better Dread Screamer. Speaking of Dread Screamer, we've got our playset of those in red, and also when we get to the blues, the card is just a powerhouse, and it goes hand in hand with what we're doing for the Shadowrealm Horror curve. So then comes our more staple 1 costs out of a Levia deck with Slithering Shadowpede that is just oh so good next to Art of War. It is now even better because we want these 1 costs next to Shadowrealm Horror as well. So we've got the Slitherings, we've got the Boneyards. This is where it gets a little spicier on the 1 cost includes, and that is 1 pink Savage Feast, yes, not red, and 1 red Graveling Growl. I was trying 3 Graveling Growl, and while at first felt like it was getting better, that you're just slamming these really above rate 3-card hands, the reality was you're also opening yourself up to unplayable hands because Graveling Growl is just so conditional. If you're drawing a lot of these together, because we're also running the yellows, then they just don't play. And so we want to break that up and still support a little bit of the smaller Mandible Claw turns with agility, and that is with Savage Feast. But we had to cut down on the Gravelings because of too many of them together not being playable, right? At the same time, too many Savage Feast, what I was running into was my hand just had so much go again that I don't really want to play the Savage Feast. If I'm playing the Savage Feast, then I'm risking discarding my Dread Screamer, discarding my Shadowrealm Horror, where those should just be my play anyway. And so the toolbox effect of Savage Feast is still good enough. It's an enabler when it has go again that we want at least 1 copy, but spamming them didn't actually work out as well as I thought. So I'm happy with the 1 and 1 on these. So then we've got Command and Conquer and Shadow of Blasphemfet to round out the 2 cost reds, and this is really where you notice the lack of Swing Big. So it's not like I straight swapped Swing Big for the Shadowrealm Horror slot. I was trying all them together in the same list, but what I was running into is that at first you think, okay, having an ample amount of 2 costs and 1 cost is always going to be synergistic. You play your 2 costs, you can always follow up with 1 cost. Why does Swing Big not work in that? And the reality is, Swing Big had a lot more synergy in the deck when you're running Tear Limb from Limb, because Tear Limb from Limb specifically wants 2 costs as part of the cost curve, so you can pay for your Tear Limb from Limb, pitch another blue for Claw into a 2 cost. And so Swing Big had that as kind of its optimal play pattern in Levia, where you can also throw it as a 2-card 8, yes, but that's only in the early game, and honestly, with all the warriors running around and all the heavy equipment that we've seen across the board, it just felt less and less impactful, and more so opponents would just save equipment and get the quicken out of you whenever you took time to play the Swing Big. So it just wasn't performing in a way that really felt unique anymore. Yes, the rate is good, but it's not just about rate, right? We need to do different things with our cards in deck. We need to be able to, apart from just numbers, string together combo turns. Shadowrealm Horror is a great card for that, right? And so that's where these 2 costs also come in, where Command and Conquer is a splashable hit effect that we always get to keep in the deck, and with Apex Bonebreaker, it is quite important to have at least 1 instance where that Might token is actually doing something more than damage. It's now adding a breakpoint to CNC, so I really like keeping the 1 in there, and the 2 cost is really flexible for when you clump on power cards. You can pitch in an Art of War, pitch in a Blood Rush, and still pay for this kind of thing. You don't always have to chase pitching a blue. And then finally, for that same toolbox effect, 1 Shadow of Blasphemfet does help you tutor out what you'll see coming up in a second, your choice recursion piece for the matchup, and that is just such a strong effect. You can win games alone by just opening Shadow Oblazafet. It's graveyard fill, it gets your tutor out, but it is a red non-block 2-cost, so when you draw them in clumps, they just don't do anything. And then lastly, for the main deck reds, we have Endless Maw, which when you talk about rate, this is the card you just cannot beat. A 2-card 9 that turns off Blood Debt is absolutely fantastic. So now we're on to the yellows, where I am running triple agile windup, and that's really because the proactivity gained by being able to discard this is something that unlocks just a new angle for the Levia deck that I've grown really used to having. The more times I was like running only 2 agile windup or something like that, I would just miss the potential of drawing into hands where I could instantly fill graveyard. And so knowing that you have, of course, like Art of Wars can do that, your Barragings or Smashbacks, but knowing that you have extra draws that do that in a slot where they still count for other things, you know, they're a 6, they turn on your Mandible Claws, they're a yellow. It's just a very flexible slot for the deck, and I don't feel punished running them at 3 because I'm generally always using them. And then speaking of the highs of discarding agile windup, that's where we get to an inclusion I didn't really think we'd see for a while, which is 3 yellow Hungering Slaughter Beasts. This is something I was running at red in the last meta and pretty happy with, but the reality is the yellow is just such a workhorse for the deck. It's the perfect flexible card. It's good in almost any situation because you can use it in so many different ways. When you look at what you can do with Hungering Slaughter Beast, it like checks its own boxes, right? A Hungering can pay for a Hungering, right? It's because yellow pays for a 2-cost. You're avoiding those clumped hands where you draw 2 the same card and they just like can't really play. Well, Hungering can do that. It can also block for 3. It can also be, 6s that you banish, 6s that you discard. It can be a yellow that you pitch in for myriad plays. It is just such a consistent piece of the deck. It's not doing anything really unique, but it's always doing something beneficial for you, especially when you consider you can't really look at Hungering in a draw scenario and be like, oh, I wish Hungering was a blue, because there just are no other blue 6s that you can run. So if you did have more blue 6s, obviously like this kind of slot would go there, but we just don't have them. So a resource card that's a 6 that's flexible, Hungering just really is that. And the 2-cost specifically is important for some other curves where, because you are generating agility, this does turn off Blood Debt. When you have Go Again and pitch a blue with it, all of a sudden those 1-costs are quite live, as well as when you actually discard the agile windup itself. If you're pitching 2 blues on the discard turn, then you can go claw, discard agile windup, pitching blue, pitch another blue for second claw, and then 2 floating comes in with Hungering Slaughter Beast, and you've carried that agility back over to the next turn and had an effective 3-card 12. So yeah, I mean, this card just works, and it is better than running any copies of Mark of the Beast at the moment, because Mark of the Beast does not end up in graveyard ever. It's just impossible, and you do want your 6s to end up in graveyard for Shadowrealm Horror. That is very critical. So this is the workhorse yellow of the deck. Speaking of workhorse yellows, this is a very similar vein as the Hungering, where yellow Graveling Growl just does a lot of things. It doesn't pay for itself, which is what the Hungering can do, but it's flexible in that when you don't have that 1-cost curve lined up, it is still a 6 for all the other things your deck can do. It's still block 3 for all the other things your deck can do. And building towards a lot of 1-costs in deck is sometimes rather clunky if they're all red, right? So the fact that we can run above rate yellows that are also 1-cost is just fantastic. So yeah, A+ on this card. Then we've got triple Art of War, which is honestly better than ever. I fluctuate on Art of War. You know, sometimes I swear I can go down to 2 and still be happy, but there are so many scenarios, especially when you run more Gravelings, where the perfect draw on a lot of turns, especially when you're ahead. When you're ahead, the perfect draw is Art of War. And so if you've crafted a lot of winning positions for yourself, and you need to just make sure that what you're drawing, what you're playing towards just gets you ahead, one of the more consistent cards that can do that is Art of War, because Blood Rush also requires a pretty specific hand, right? You need to have 6s, you need to like start with your pitch card, but Art of War is the card that lets you craft things a little bit more precisely. And especially with Hooves of the Shadow Beast, when you banish with Art of War, you're allowed to see what you draw before you decide on whether or not to break Hooves. So there's just a lot of finesse and control that you get with Art of War in the deck right now. And then we've got Blood Rush, which we already talked about as being the core reason we are even running Claws. And like I said, it is easier than ever to push 4 wide. Not only with Consumed being more reliable, because you probably are going to end up with not only Dread Screamers, but Shadowrealm Horrors and Banished, but even on first cycle with Hooves of the Shadow Beast and Shadowrealm Horror, those are just more ways to guarantee that when you've got the right hand, you just push for Blood Rush to go 4 wide. And now this card gives +8 to the turn, right? And it's not just +8 because it's also enabling Mandible Claws at all. So to really factor in what this card's doing for the deck is just nothing but good numbers. Lastly, when looking for synergy pieces around Blood Rush, Beast Within is just a perfect pairing. And the fact that it turns off Blood Debt means you can actually YOLO a lot of small hands with Blood Rush and a blue and Beast Within, right? Where if it wasn't Beast Within, a 3-card Blood Rush play like that would never work. But Beast Within can be your Hail Mary out, because at least Blood Debt will be off when you make your play. And with running higher counts of Graveling and Diabolic, the Banish is quite relevant for now drawing into these extra 1 costs. You can recoup that Blood Rush rate and just have really strong plays. It's also insulation against discard effects. Yeah, it's just, I mean, this card is just good. It's just good. People who want to cut this card are just dead wrong. Do not listen to them. I would not play a Blood Rush deck without Beast Within. Then we're on to our blues, and this one's another workhorse blue because it is a breakpoint go-again attacker in blue Dread Screamer that works perfectly alongside all your other 1 costs they are including. The card is just really good, and of course you can double up on the fact that you are stacking go-again in your deck, because if you flip Consumed, these are still very strong out of Banished. Then we've got Smashback Ailhorn, which, similar to why I'm really vibing with 3 Agile Windups, I like 3 Smashback Ailhorns. I'm really not blocking with this card, but when you do draw them together, you can actually probably even use all 3. I mean, this counts as, you know, you've got another good card that you want in Arsenal, another good one in hand, but you can likely just play one, use one as pitch, and Arsenal the third. Like, there are only good combinations with Smashback Ailhorn, in all honesty. Generally, if you ever do like find yourself with 2, you should factor whether or not one should be your pitch, or sorry, one should probably always be your pitch, but you have to factor whether your second one gets played immediately or you set it in Arsenal. And honestly, setting these in Arsenal is really strong for finding your moment where, oh, I drew into an extra 1 cost on this hand. To make this 1 cost rate guaranteed, I can play out my Smashback from Arsenal, set that new 1 cost, and now I know I've got the agility to enable, even off of the back of like a Hungering, that my turn will be quite good. So Smashback is a enabler for a lot of those plays. Then in 0 cost blues, we've got Barraging Beatdown, which is just an all-star in the blue slot. This card has been a turtle cracker for a long time now when your opponent is trying to not let any damage through. When you come in for 6 go again and they block 2 cards, you can Barraging Beatdown one of their other 2 cards out of their hand and effectively deal 5 damage off of a blue. You've taken away a blocking card and are giving +2 to your next. It is a fantastic part of that end game, and it also just blocks 3 in the meantime, and it lets you instantly fill Graveyard, and into Enigma specifically, you get a lot of value off the Intimidate. So the card just feels really good right now, but even though technically I count this in the main board, I am siding these out versus new, because when they get to spam dump all these blues on you, the only thing that is really threatening is when they stack a lot of barragings, because it's basically like free damage go again when new's playing into you. Whereas otherwise, if they take like a blue Dread Screamer, it's probably not going to get go again. They've only got maybe 3 CNCs like in a Death Touch to hit it all out of their graveyard. So you want to deny their ability to just stack free damage really with Go Again all at once. If they pitch into new and then swing like a Deadwood Rumbler, that's fine. Yeah, it was good. It was a 1-card 6, sure. But you don't want to give them the opportunity to dump 3 barragings and that Deadwood Rumbler. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden that was a 1-card 12. So take out your blue go-agains is the main thing. Then Wrecker Romp Blue, I mean, we're just never not going to run this. This is a card that more than ever, I feel like I'm ending up drawing it in situations where it is like clearly the worst card to random draw, because if it's off like a Savage Feast and it's, you know, what you're trying to cycle into Arsenal, it is just unplayable out of Arsenal. So that's the only downside of this card, honestly, is that with some of the random draws, that last card sometimes wants to be your arsenal, but if it is this card, it just can't be your arsenal. It's just too bad, because the cost of discarding just doesn't make any sense with the stats on this thing for Levia. So you're really playing it because it's a blue 6 that blocks 3. Speaking of blue 6s, this one does not block 3, but it's actually quite playable because the cost on the discard is an effect. It's off the top of the deck and then you discard from your hand rather than the cost itself. So with the agilities you generate, sometimes Deadwood Rumbler is actually quite playable because it will turn on your claws. Otherwise, it's just going to be a blue 6 that you're banishing to Art of War or discarding into Blood Rush or using as pitch, but it is quite playable, so don't miss those lines. Then we get into the spicier blues for this build, and like I already mentioned with Tear Limb from Limb coming out just due to Shadowrealm Horror, and then how that all warps the swing big inclusions and stuff, one thing that we aren't cutting, even though I was trying to play without it, is Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell, because you do still want to give yourself the option to turbo Consumed into an instant win, and Convulsions is just the best card for that. If you have like 20 blood debt and you flip Consumed and you know that you're drawing that last hand of blues, the best blue is going to be one that gives you the ability to close the game instantly, which is most consistently out of a dominate effect. So that's really what the Convulsions are in there for. I rarely ever play this card, like truly, but having it in deck is just a good option. And I want options, right? I want ability to choose my game plan, choose my end games with Levia, and Convulsions gives you that, as well as blocking 3 as a non-attack, which can come up. Then we've got 1 Diabolic, and I was running a lot more back in the day. In fact, right now the 1 cost count is at 12, but I was running it at 15 because we were at one point fleshing out the Diabolic count, fleshing out the extra red Gravelings, and that's where the clunkiness of a lot of these conditional 1 costs really started to get to me. So we trimmed it down 1 blue, well, it's only in blue, cold foil though, Diabolic, and that 1 red Graveling plus that Savage Feast red rounds out the 12 1 cost total. I think you can get away with running 2 Diabolic, and in fact, maybe cutting one of the Convulsions for a Diabolic is going to fit this metagame a little bit better, but I have not hated just including 1 right now because you have so many more opportunities to play out 1 costs. And then we're rounding out the blues with Doomsday and Soul Harvest, which you're just never not going to run, and these ones are, I mean, they're so powerful as are blues, but they're not very good when New plays them out, right? If New plays these, this isn't going to do anything. It's really realistically not going to hit a 6 in her graveyard. If it does, cool, she got +1 and Dominate out of it, but then Diabolic won't do anything. Soul Harvest, she'll still have to banish cards out of her graveyard, but it's only going to come out for 6, right? She doesn't have any blood debt, and then Doomsday will never work for her. So these blues are pretty safe at all times. The other thing to note is whenever New is playing blues, they are going to end up back in your graveyard, which is actually kind of cute. So just keep that in mind. All right, so that was 57 cards as the main deck that I'm electing to play. Well, it's not always the 57 against New. I do swap those barragings. But otherwise, what I've been testing out right now is just sticking to that 57 core. And that's really because it's hitting all the ratios I'm looking for. It's at around 46s, right? Depending on how you count Diabolic. Just really strong for the Shadowrealm Horror consistency that we're looking for when over 2/3 of our deck are 6s. And then also the cost curve is very healthy with about 20-20-20 across the board. It's very hard to clunk up. And your blood debt count is also quite high with over 30 blood debt cards, or ways to turn off blood debt rather. So the 57 core is very strong, but then we are looking for the additional sideboard slots that are going to make a big difference in the matchup. So generally what I'm doing on the sideboard is I'm taking 2 yellows that are good for the matchup. So send packing would be the 2 yellows that are quite good into aggro, right? It's more disruption. It's more ability to put might tokens on hit effects that matter. So that's what the send packings go in for. Then we've got smashing performance, which is extra graveyard fill versus Kano and disruption against his potions, and also good into dash and max, of course. Then Shade and Death Hydra, which is for the more mid-range and like late-game oriented decks. This, as our yellow of choice, is just very strong. With Shadowrealm Horror, you can actually play this guy from its own banish effect, and there are situations where your opponent just like feeds you that. You've got 2 6s in graveyard, you look at your hand, you're like, oh, I'm just going to block with Shaden, and I know I can play it after my Shadowrealm Horror. Like, that actually comes up. The card's just, yeah, it's very good, and we don't have Tear Limb from Limb for that ceiling, but we have the more consistent ways to play it out with Convulsions. And then, as far as electing for that 60th card at this point, you're going to choose a recursion piece. And you're going to note we're missing some of the recursion pieces you might be used to, like Guardian of the Shadow Realm or Deep-Rooted Evil. But that's because Ghostly Visit right now is the highest value recursion piece into most aggro. If you remember the old days of Levia, where the best rate we could ever do was just with Ghostly and Banish, play out a Dread Screamer, pitching a blue, and come in for a 2-card 10, effectively. That was like the ceiling of Levia, and there were whole builds dedicated around rolling scabs just to try to make every Writhing, every Hungering also let you play Ghostly Visit. Well, we have Shadowrealm Horror. And Shadowrealm Horror is just an extra red Dread Screamer, but actually, you know, with that extra +1 as well. So Ghostly Visit insulates you from needing to always hit 3 off Shadowrealm Horror to do something with it, with its own like built-in recursion piece. You don't need that. If you just hit 2 for go again, then you can slam out that Ghostly. You come in for a 2-card 11. That is an insane rate against a lot of the aggressive decks right now, and you're not punished by including Ghostly just because it blocks 3. Of course, you can fetch it out with Shadow of Blasphemfet as well. So Ghostly Visit is just, I mean, like, this is what I'm running into so many aggressive and mid-range matchups. Like KO, yes, you could run Guardian of the Shadow Realm, but actually right now Ghostly Visit is just the higher value include, I think. Into the more mid-range and late-game oriented matchups, Howl from Beyond is a better choice, though, because you want more ability to control your graveyard rather than expecting that you'll get some extra graveyard fill off blocks to fuel your aggressive strat when you're playing the Ghostly Visit. Howl from Beyond insulates you more from your opponent taking off turns, and you still get to refill your graveyard. So Howl is also very important, but right now it's really like one or the other, depending on the matchup for me. And then the last piece is Hungering Demagon, because why not run this card into Prism and Bolton, right? This is the one that you could swap around easily depending on your local meta, but I was running into a lot of Prisms, and without running Scabskins and Gamblers, I still wanted a slot at least that helped me in that matchup. I don't think those matchups, well, Prism specifically, is that hard, but having one extra piece to tip it over the edge and makes me feel like, you know, I've done my homework. I'm expecting the meta a little bit. Yeah, so Hungering Demagon just is that included. It's a great rate when you're playing into the light heroes. Now, the last piece is specifically against new, and it looks a little crazy, I know, but I tried a lot of things with the new matchup. I tried playing more aggressive with draw discards, you know, extra counts of Wild Ride, that kind of thing. And the issue with that is new has a lot of disruption to your average 4-card hand just off of her mask alone. When she leads in with one of her 1-cost blues, you know, so some of the Majestics already freak you out because of their potential hit effects, but at minimum, she could turn in one of her cards to just trigger her mask and make you banish a card. And because that was happening so consistently, apart from just the other disruption, playing Wild Rides and Pulpings just doesn't really work into new. You know, you're trying to do these things because Graveyard Fill is a little bit hard in that matchup. You don't get to block the stealth card specifically, but the draw discards are only good really on a 4-card hand, if not a 5-card hand. And into new, it is very hard to actually get those. The moment that she strips one of those 4-card plays from happening, you start to stumble that much more. So the better include that I found into new, and this is no secret, but Snag applying retroactively after the Back Alley Oracle Bulletin number 1 is so massive for new. Because they can lead with 1, right? They can lead with 1. Then they can pick to pieces. Now it goes to 6. Then they can hiss. Now it goes to 10. Now they can Fang Strike. It goes to 11. And if you gave it one bit of equipment, if you just put your hooves in front of it because you want to force something out of them, man, it's a good play regardless. You then snag, and the potential 3 cards that they spent on that play are just gone for 1 card. And in the barraging slot, this is that kind of slot that you wanted to end up in graveyard consistently anyway. Your barragings are going to end up in graveyard. You are ready for that. You're either going to block with them or you're going to play with them. But you're siding out the barragings, but Snag also fills the graveyard in a very similar way, regardless of not having the block value. So it is just so high value for the new matchup that I'm doing it. I'm running 3. New can still be a little tough, but the value off Snag, especially if you blow them out and get like 2 cards worth of value out of the Snag and deny the hit effect because you gave him a little piece of armor, is just very, very strong in that matchup, because it's not generally that they're winning on damage, it's that they just slow you down, and then their lower damage starts to look a lot scarier because you're not spiking your damage. So if you can set them like 2 turns back in terms of damage presented off of a Snag, then it gives you that much more room to be able to stumble and not feel like the game is ending. So it's really good. I'm quite happy with Snag. I don't have them in foil, so this deck is not exactly max rarity, but let's talk about some of the cards that didn't make the cut. So we already talked about a lot of this, mentioning these cards by name. Pour one out for Eye of Ophidia. This is one that a lot of European players actually were resurgencing, because it is a card I played a lot back in old Levia. Like, we're talking pre-Dusk Till Dawn, when the best and like only thing you could do was be a Blood Rush deck. I mean, you didn't have the Demi Hero. And so Eye of Ophidia helping you get towards Blood Rush and like fixing your Blood Rush draws was just massive. Absolutely massive. And everyone made fun of me because like, oh, it's just a Kano card. And I'm like, dude, I'm telling you, I'm the Levia guy. I'm telling you this card's good in Levia. And it is still good in Levia, but I wasn't loving it in this build, because right now, if you're going to go for that kind of greedy slot, the non-block blue slot, I just think it should be Diabolic right now, because Diabolic has the upside of being on curve with the rest of your deck, while also being like this flexible non-block blue. So Eye of Ophidia is just like, it's like a couple steps too far for me right now in terms of greed. I'd rather more copies of Diabolic than I would the Eye of Ophidia right now. Then we've got the Scabskins Gamblers. Like I said, not making the cut just mainly because I needed to make room for Snag. I don't hate these cards at all. In fact, running Scabskins into the aggro matchups and then just like hoping you get lucky on like the maybe 1 or 2 turns that you do end up rolling Scabs is definitely still fine. But Hooves right now is absolutely getting there for me in the aggro matchups. I don't really miss the extra 1 point that Scabskins gives. It's 2 more block, but -1 on filling graveyard. So it's about like 1 point difference on the Hooves, and I just don't miss it. Because then like the guaranteed action point just also saves you from like ever rolling the 1, right? So you just save 2 slots in not running it. You're a little bit weaker into Prism for sure. ALS like will just eat one of your big turns, but the reality is you will have enough big turns now with Shadowrealm Horror that you don't need necessarily that Blood Rush to get around ALS. You can let the ALS eat that Blood Rush. It took their whole turn anyway, and you can still win the game. Then we talked about Guardian of the Shadow Realm right now. I just don't think it's the better recursion piece for those like number grindy matchups like KO was. Ghostly Visit is just better. Tear Limb from Limb, like I said, we're moving around some of the 2 costs out of the deck, and Swing Big was really the high synergy payoff for this, and it's not in the deck, and Tear Limb's just not in the deck. It's worse when you're running Diabolics, right? So just none of that is really making it right now, so yeah, unfortunately, goodbye. And, this saves you some money as well. You don't need Swing Big. Then we've got Deep-Rooted Evil. Now, this one is something I was testing into new as well, because whenever they make you banish with Mask, you just, recycle out your graveyard or your recursion pieces pretty easily. Go ahead, ship this to banish. But the reality was it wasn't happening enough. Maybe there's a world where you up the recursion pieces that you run as a whole. You run like 3 to 4 recursion pieces into new, but in all honesty, the snags were just doing more in those slots than extra recursion when I was testing it. So for now, I don't think Deep Rooted makes the cut, but that's it for the deck. The link is in the description below with a couple preliminary matchups. Like I said, for just some closing thoughts about Levia right now, I have told Runaways that I am very confident in taking Levia to Nationals. Obviously, I would do it no matter how she was in the meta, but legitimately, if you are testing for Nationals, Levia has game into Enigma. It is actually a pretty tough matchup. You need to play against good Enigmas. Don't take that matchup for granted. She has game into new. It's a little bit draw sequence dependent and kind of like, do they have it in certain scenarios? But you can make correct bluff decisions and win that matchup. And then Zen can also be tough if he, transcends early and then actually can like use his head on the exact turn he wants it to then pull together the Zen combo, push you past your demi hero. If that all lines up for him, then you probably don't win that game. But that just doesn't always happen for the Zen. Zen deals a lot of damage, but if you can just control the flip in that matchup, you get more value than he does. It's kind of just like the normal aggro matchup, and he feels just a little bit less consistent than Katsu in always making that matchup terrifying. It is terrifying a lot of the time, but not all the time. So yeah, I feel really good about Levia right now, and we even recorded an Enigma game that is just absolutely wild. So let's take a look at that. Wild game that I had versus Enigma, and so this is a matchup that, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, it can actually be quite tough. It's a little bit more so about your own deck. Can your Levia deck consistently play hand by hand these above rate turns? Can you not stumble? And so you need to make sure your own deck and your own play is finding avenues around those potential pitfalls, because the Enigma is going to just build up a board, is going to build up this effective extra life with Ward, and then if you're just not pushing over it, if you're not making her block, making her make these hard decisions, then you just kind of get rolled. So it's actually kind of tough. I think this is one of those matchups where more novice Levia players are going to struggle and probably find it unfun, whereas more veteran Levia players will quite enjoy the challenge of figuring out the matchup, because I know I did. I think initially this matchup was quite easy, and then it got a little tougher as the Enigmas got better, but now it's feeling quite manageable again. So it's been a little bit of a roller coaster, and I'm not really sure how it'll end up entirely, honestly. But here we go. We're playing the early game. And you saw that with our early plays there, on turn 0 specifically, we said pass. We don't want to give Enigma an option to play out wards, and luckily had early game playables that have not ramped us into Blood Debt even all the way onto turn 3. So a little bit of board cleanup so far, just killed a Haze Bending, throwing damage here and there, and also found a Howl from Beyond. Although we didn't tutor it directly into Banish, it is in the graveyard, so we're going to have to find room to probably splash Banish at least twice, would be ideal. But unfortunately, our first graveyard banish of the game here does not work out well for us. There were a lot of misses. We don't have a lot of Blood Debt. It is fine to get them out of the way now, but trading damage in our favor is always better than not, right? So a little on the back foot in that regard. So now they come in with a Rage Spectre. This is just a very strong 2-card 6, and so we have to figure our hand doesn't return that much damage here, and I think a lot of Levias might look at this as, oh, I'm just going to, block down with 2 cards, swing Claw, and Arsenal like Savage Feast, right? That's something that into a lot of other matchups you can get away with. But into Enigma specifically, I really do not want to just Claw. I don't want to do that. I want to at least say, give me 2 cards. Please, please 2 cards. Because if you claw, then any chump 3 block in their deck is going to cover that up. But if you throw at least 6, then there can be a little bit of confusion here and there on the Enigma side. How do they block? Maybe they did clump some non-blocks. So asking for that second card compounds their hard decisions that much more. So it seems pretty minimal, but you know, that's a difference in this matchup versus how you would normally play into other matchups, I do think. So now we're finding our rhythm. This is actually a great spot. We talked about barraging beatdown in the deck tech into Enigma, and this is one of the things they can do where Enigma is incentivized to start blocking pretty immediately. You throw that first 6 go again, they block 6 damage on it. Then you can immediately come in with a barraging beatdown. Not only is it going to fill your graveyard for you, which is beautiful, but then that 1 cost at the end gets an extra 5-ish true damage, which is even better versus Enigma because it's also tied to board clear. It's not like real damage, but it's board clear, potentially in ways that they didn't want to happen for the turn. So great turn cycle, but now into a bit of a stumble, and that's the downside of not having an arsenal up on our end. And this is something where we could have made choices a little bit differently. On that Deadwood Rumbler turn, we could have kept the Savage Feast in hand. It was just vanilla damage. We could have kept it in hand. Maybe it would have been an arsenal for this kind of turn, and it could have changed how we do things. Actually discarding Agile Windup, leading with Savage Feast could have been a play. But one of the things that I'm constantly trying to do with Levia right now is just keep Arsenal open because of how Shadowrealm Horror works. It's a little counterintuitive because normally you're cycling like Arsenals quite often in Levia, but with Shadowrealm Horror, if you haven't seen one yet, and we haven't seen one, I actually want an open Arsenal to find that first Shadowrealm Horror because it lets you make the easier decision of like, keeping a 1 cost in hand, pitching a blue, and then just kind of figuring out where the turn goes from there. So we haven't seen a Shadowrealm Horror. So that kind of led into the decision of wanting to keep the arsenal open. Kind of funny that it has not worked out that way. But now we have a turn cycle that's quite interesting. We have an ability to go 3 wide, but it requires cracking the Savage Sash. Now, this isn't really seen as a downside, honestly. This is quite good because this 4-card hand, even if that yellow was a blue, would not have been able to get played this way, straight up, because the Dread Screamer's Loan would have cost 4, the Boneyard would have cost a 5th resource, so we get around all of that with Savage Sash. Savage Sash legitimately is an extra card in hand. It's like a 5th card in hand, regardless of the fact that we pitched a yellow. That could have been a blue. Would have done the same thing, just act as this 5th card in hand. So we found a good opportunity to do that, go past what the Enigma was trying to really do defensively that turn, clear the board. We're still, honestly, like quite behind on life, and also because of making that forced play, we banished 9 cards out of the graveyard. We don't look to be in a fantastic position. It's a playable position for sure, but it ain't great. It ain't great because now the graveyard is a little thinner than we necessarily want it to be, and sure, we can loop Howl, but putting Howl in the graveyard here and then only coming in for this 1 attack, not being able to follow it up with like a Hooves Crack into something, means we are at the mercy of drawing a way to instantly fill the graveyard, which honestly, that's pretty likely out of the deck, just regardless, but Spoiled Skull can also give you an out there. You can just target something simple like Smashback Ailhorn, Barraging Beatdown, like things like the Blood Rush Bellow, right? Like anything that proactively would have filled the graveyard would have been pretty interesting in this kind of spot just to get out of it. So now we're stuck in another tough position. Our blood debt is insanely high, and we can go for some interesting plays. The first option, right, is this is a large enough hand. Maybe we go for Deadwood Rumbler into Hooves. Right, that's potential here because there's a chance it even discards the Beast Within. We could pop off and have like a turn that just goes insanely wide. But if we draw a whiff off the top of the deck and are not able to crack Hooves, not able to turn off Blood Debt, that really would be instantly game over. So even though that's the ceiling of what that turn could be, we're not going to take that risk. I'd rather still give ourselves a line here that actually builds more into the next turn, because Deadwood Rumbler in Arsenal with an agility up is its own combo turn, right? Because now we can look to lead with Deadwood Rumbler out of Arsenal. It will have Go Again. It will turn on our claws. If we are able to then keep a large hand, and Enigma doesn't really present on hit effects, she's going to throw damage here and there, we could do something quite special. So with the hand that we draw up, we actually get even more choices, which is kind of wild. We have perfect blood debt count for this line. Let's see if you guys see it. But we can play out the Howl, right? Pitch a card, pitch like the Hungering, right? Play out the Howl. That puts us at 13 blood debt. Then we can pitch double Rajing into Shaden Death Hydra. We will take 0 damage from Shaden Death Hydra. It will have +1. It will have Go Again. And then we can flip Redeemed, checking every box we care about for this kind of matchup. Our graveyard's back to being in a good spot. We played out the Howl, so the Howl will not get flipped face down with Redeemed. It is a beautiful position to be, and Enigma had just built up a board, and we're going so obviously over what a hand can block. So pretty wild turn here. With this final flip at the end, we do, in theory, like take 2 damage, but what it's really doing is unlocking our ability to play the late game without worrying about blood debt, which wasn't likely to be what was going to cost us the game. We were finally in a good spot with Graveyard anyway because of the that last turn that didn't actually tax us too heavily. It left us right where we want to be. So now remember what we talked about, leaving the Deadwood Rumbler in Arsenal, looking for Go Again. Right? Deadwood Rumbler with Go Again means you turn on claws. And now we have the perfect turn. You guys might have thought that initial turn with the Deadwood Rumbler and the Beast Within a hand, that's when you go for this kind of wide play. Nope, we could wait. We waited an entire 3 turns to still pull off a very similar line because our deck's going to give us opportunities like that again and again. So now we get our Deadwood Rumbler. Granted, it's through this round's on me, so we're not getting that much damage through, but Deadwood Rumbler into Claw, into Howl, into the Graveling Growl. This is just a wild turn to just come off the back of a Deadwood Rumbler, but that's like the wide pressure that's allotted to us when we're given a Deadwood Rumbler. Like any draw discard, right? Anything that turns on claws can be quite spicy. So now we're in a spot where we have another 3-card 12, right? Boneyard Marauder into Shadow Blasphite is a 3-card 12, but we could play it differently. We could also just pitch for the Endless Maw if it looks like it's going to win us the game, but we need to see a little bit on how this ends up blocking on their end to get a gauge on whether or not Endless Maw will actually present lethal. So they go down to 1, but they have Tunic up, they've got Spectral Shield, they've got 3 cards in hand, so we could try for it, but then our graveyard once again is in a state where we can't easily kind of get ahead on that unless we draw out of it. So yeah, sure enough, they are able to block out 6. We don't know just yet if they could have blocked the 9, but we knew 6 wasn't really going to present lethal. That line instead protects our graveyard a bit more, makes sure that we get to play more turns without just losing off of the back of that. So pretty interesting, right? Like you saw several turns here where we're thinking about the future, and that's really what Levia comes down to. Very interesting deck, very hard to play, but very rewarding. Hope you guys enjoyed.